The afternoon sun hung low over the eastern ridge, painting everything in shades of amber and shadow. Jake Thornton sat on his porch, hands weathered by 6 decades of work, eyes fixed on the horizon where the past lived as clearly as the present. Beside him, his grandson Daniel studied an old map with the curiosity only 4-year-olds possess. The paper was brittle, yellowed by time, marked with symbols that meant nothing to a boy born in the new century. But those symbols carried weight. They carried history. They carried sins. Grandpa Jake, what does this map mean? Daniel's finger traced the boundary lines, stopping at the Apache markings near the eastern section. Why is our ranch smaller than what's drawn here? Jake reached for the map, his hand trembling slightly, as it always did when confronting relics of 1885. 28 years had passed. Might as well have been yesterday. The boy waited with that patient intensity children have when they sense something important hovering just beyond their understanding. Jake cleared his throat. The words came harder than they should have. You want the truth or the pretty story? The truth. Good boy, his father had raised him right before the mining accident took him 2 years back. Some lessons survived the grave. Then you have to promise to hear all of it. This isn't a story about heroes. Jake folded the map carefully, creating precise creases where old creases had already worn the paper thin. This is a story about a man learning to live with his conscience. Daniel nodded, solemn as a judge. August 1885, I was 35 years old. Your great-grandfather, Samuel, had been dead 3 years. I thought I knew everything about him. I was wrong. Jake's gaze drifted back to the ridge. The light was changing now, the way it always did at this hour. Golden turning to bronze. Day preparing to surrender to night. That's when she came. A woman taller than any person I'd ever seen. She came carrying the truth your great-grandfather tried to bury. And she made me choose between everything I had and everything I was. Daniel leaned forward. Jake could see it in the boy's eyes. That hunger for story. That need to understand how the past shapes the present. It started with dust, Jake said. Always starts with something small. Just a cloud on the horizon, moving slow and deliberate across the flatlands. So, the morning of August 15th, 1885 began like any other morning on the Thornton Ranch. Jake woke at 4:30, body responding to rhythms established over years of solitary routine. The house was quiet except for the settling sounds old wood makes when temperature shifts. He moved through darkness with the confidence of a man who knows every floorboard, every corner, every spot where furniture waited to stub unwary toes. Coffee first, always coffee. He ground the beans by hand, the rhythmic turning of the mill a meditation that cleared sleep from his mind. While water heated on the stove, Jake opened his father's ledger. His ledger now, though he still thought of it as Samuel's. The entries were written in his own hand these days, but the ghost of his father's meticulous script haunted the earlier pages. Numbers told stories if you knew how to read them. 215 head of cattle, down 3 from last month. 1 lost to rattlesnake, 2 to what might have been rustlers or might have been mountain cats. Hard to know in this country. The land kept its secrets. Current value at Santa Fe prices, approximately $700 on the hoof. Enough to keep the ranch running, pay off the banknote, put food on the table for himself and Robert. His son, 3 years old and sleeping upstairs, dreaming whatever 3-year-olds dream about. Jake took his coffee outside, standing on the porch as dawn broke across the valley. 515 acres of high desert grasslands stretched before him. From Willow Creek in the west to the eastern ridge where the land rose toward sky. His land, legally his, morally his. Or so he believed that morning. The air smelled of soytini and dust and the peculiar emptiness. Mod comes from living where your nearest neighbor is half a day's ride away. Tommy Reed would arrive soon, the ranch's only hired hand. Good man, loyal. Though there was something in Tommy's eyes sometimes, a shadow Jake had never quite understood. Jake spent the morning repairing fence along the southern boundary. 40 posts needed replacing, rotted by time and weather. Mesquite wood if he could get it, pine if he couldn't. Each post cost 15 cents. He'd calculated it 3 times. $6 total. A significant expense but necessary. Cattle respected fences only when fences were sound. The work was meditative. Dig, set, tamp, move on. His hands knew the rhythm. His back accepted the strain. This was honest work. This was what men did. They maintained. They built. They kept chaos at bay through sheer force of labor. By noon, the sun had turned the air thick and heavy. Jake straightened from his work, wiping sweat from his forehead with a sleeve already soaked through. That's when he saw it. A dust cloud on the western horizon, small at first, easy to dismiss as wind stirring loose dirt. But it moved with purpose, steady and direct. Someone was coming. Visitors were rare. The last person who'd ridden out this way had been the tax assessor 6 months back. Before that, Marshal Garrett checking on reports of cattle thieves. People didn't just drop by when you lived this far from anything resembling civilization. Jake walked back to the house, stopping at the porch to retrieve his Winchester. Not out of fear, just caution. The rifle leaned against the door frame where it always waited. 15 rounds, well-maintained, accurate at 200 yards. A tool like any other. He stood in the shade of the porch overhang, watching the dust cloud grow larger. Minutes passed. The figure began to take shape, emerging from the heat shimmer like something conjured from dreams. Tall. That was the first thing Jake noticed. Then the steady, purposeful gait. Then the traditional Apache clothing that moved slightly in the hot wind. Fringed leather, beadwork catching sunlight, moccasins that had traveled considerable distance. The woman stopped at the bottom of his porch steps. Jake found himself looking up. He was 5'10", an average height for a man of his generation. But this woman stood at least 6'4". Her shoulders were broad, her posture unnervingly straight. She studied him with an intensity that made his chest tighten with an unease he couldn't name. She carried a leather satchel against her chest. The leather was old, mended in multiple places with careful stitching. Her hands gripped it like it contained something precious, something worth traveling days through hostile territory to deliver. Jake's hand drifted closer to the rifle. Not reaching, just positioning. Old habits from years when Apache raids were more than stories told around fires. But she made no threatening moves. She simply stood there, waiting with the patience of someone who had nowhere else to be and all the time in the world. "Can I help you?" Jake's voice came out rougher than intended. The words felt inadequate for the strangeness of the moment. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she climbed the 3 wooden steps to his porch. Each footfall echoed with weight that seemed heavier than physics allowed. When she reached the top, though, the physical reality of her height became impossible to ignore. Jake had to tilt his head back to meet her gaze. Something ancient lived in those eyes. Something that made him feel like a child caught in a lie he hadn't yet told. The leather satchel opened with a soft creak. She withdrew a stack of papers bound with frayed rawhide cord. The documents looked old, edges yellowed and brittle, corners worn soft by time and handling. She held them out toward him. Jake's hands reached for the papers before his mind caught up to his body. Some instinct deeper than thought told him this moment would change everything. "You're Thornton." Not a question, a statement of fact that somehow felt like an accusation. "I am." His throat felt dry despite the coffee he'd drunk that morning. "Jake Thornton. Your father was Samuel Thornton." The way she said his father's name sent a chill through Jake's chest that had nothing to do with the wind picking up across the valley. There was history in those words, weight and pain and something sharp underneath. Jake looked down at the papers in his hands. The top document showed a map, hand-drawn in faded ink with boundary markers and notations in handwriting he recognized immediately. His father's hand, precise, controlled, the script of a man who believed documentation mattered. "What is this?" "The truth." She shifted her weight. For the first time, Jake caught something in her expression that looked almost like exhaustion. Not physical tiredness, but the kind that comes from carrying something heavy for too long. "The truth about what your father did, about what he took." Jake's jaw tightened. His father had been many things, hard, demanding, distant at times, but dishonest wasn't one of them. Samuel Thornton had built this ranch from nothing, working land that no one else wanted until he turned it into something worth having. The old man had died with honor, respected by everyone who knew him. Whatever this woman thought she knew, she had it wrong. My father was a good man. Your father was a thief, and she said it without malice, just stating a fact as simple as the color of the sky, and I can prove it. The wind picked up again, carrying dust across the porch between them. Jake looked at the papers in his hands, then back up at the woman who seemed to block out the sun. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a memory flickered, a conversation overheard as a boy. His father speaking in hushed tones to another man about complications and necessary actions and keeping the past buried. Who are you? My name is Nasha. She reached into the satchel again, pulling out another document. This one sealed with wax that had cracked with age. The seal bore markings Jake didn't recognize. Official looking. Government looking. And I'm here to take back what belongs to my people. Jake stared at the wax seal, his mind racing through possibilities he didn't want to entertain. The afternoon sun beat down on the porch and sweat gathered at the back of his neck despite the breeze. Nasha stood motionless, waiting with that same infinite patience. Take back what exactly? His voice came out harder than he intended, defensive. She gestured toward the open land stretching beyond his fence line, where brown grass swayed in waves across the valley floor. All of this, from the creek bed to the eastern ridge. 300 acres that were promised to my grandfather's people as permanent settlement. Jake felt heat rise in his chest. My father bought this land fair and square. I've seen the deed. It's legal. Legal and fair are not the same thing. Nasha unfolded the sealed document carefully, revealing dense handwriting and signatures at the bottom. The paper crackled with age. The ink there had faded to brown, but the words were still legible. This is the original agreement, signed by territorial representatives and witnessed by a federal agent. It guaranteed safe passage and settlement rights to Apache families relocating from disputed territories. Your father was one of 3 men who signed as local guarantors. Jake's eyes scanned the document. The language was formal, legal, full of whereas and hereto and party of the first part. But there, at the bottom of the page, one name leaped out at him. Samuel Thornton. The signature was unmistakable. That same confident script Jake had seen on letters and ledgers and the deed to this very property. The date showed April 1863, more than 20 years past. Jake would have been barely old enough to remember much beyond the ranch house and his mother's cooking. Guarantors of what? Protection, resources, the right to build without harassment. Nasha's jaw tightened. Jake could see muscles working beneath the skin, emotion controlled but not absent. For 6 months, my people lived here, built shelters, planted crops, started to believe they'd finally found somewhere the government would leave them alone. Jake wanted to argue, to defend the man who'd raised him with stories of hard work and honest dealing. But something in Nasha's tone carried the weight of truth. She wasn't performing, wasn't exaggerating. She was stating facts with the resignation of someone who'd had to repeat them too many times. What happened? Water. She pointed to a section of the map where someone had drawn a jagged line in different ink. More recent ink, added later. Your father and his partners discovered a natural spring system running underground through this entire valley. More water than anyone expected to find out here, enough to make the land valuable. The pieces started connecting in Jake's mind, forming a picture he didn't want to see. He knew about the springs. They were the reason this ranch could support cattle when neighboring properties struggled through dry seasons. His father had always called it luck, divine providence, the reward for taking a chance on land nobody else wanted. So they asked you to leave. Nasha's voice dropped lower. When we refused to abandon what we'd been promised, they brought men with weapons, burned the shelters, destroyed the crops. My grandfather tried to show them the agreement. This document you're holding now. They took it from him and told him to disappear or die. Jake looked down at the paper in his hands, at his father's signature, bold and clear at the bottom. The sun felt too hot suddenly, the air too thick. Somewhere in the distance, one of his horses whinnied from the corral, a normal sound in a moment that felt increasingly unreal. Why now? Why come here after all this time? Nasha met his eyes. For the first time, he saw something other than determination there. He saw grief, old and deep, the kind that never fully heals. Because my grandfather died last month. Before he passed, he made me promise to finish what he started, to prove the truth, to make sure at least one Thornton knows what really happened on this land. The wind shifted, carrying dust across the porch between them. Jake realized his hands were shaking slightly, making the old papers tremble. Everything he thought he knew about his family, about this place, about the foundation of his entire life, suddenly felt like it was built on sand instead of stone. There's more. Nasha pulled another item from her satchel, something wrapped in cloth, something buried on your property that proves everything I'm saying, and I need your permission to find it. Jake felt the question rise in his throat before he could stop it. What's buried? Evidence. Nasha unwrapped the cloth slowly, revealing a piece of carved stone no bigger than her palm. Symbols marked its surface, weathered but still visible. Geometric patterns that look both ancient and deliberate. This is half of a boundary marker. Apache families used them to mark territory boundaries in agreements with settlers. They were always made in pairs, buried at opposite ends of claimed land. She turned it over in her hands. Jake saw how the bottom edge was jagged, clearly broken from a larger piece. The craftsmanship was detailed despite the stone's age, showing patterns that meant nothing to him but clearly held significance for her. This one came from the western edge near the creek. The other half should be buried near the eastern ridge where your property line runs now. If we find it and the pieces match, it proves this land was marked as Apache territory before any deed your father claimed. Jake looked past her toward the eastern section of his ranch, where rocky outcrops gave way to steeper terrain. He'd ridden that ridge hundreds of times, checking fence lines and searching for stray cattle. Never once had he thought about what might lie beneath the surface. This doesn't make sense. He heard the desperation creeping into his own voice. My father built this ranch from nothing. He worked himself nearly to death, making something out of empty land. You're telling me it was all stolen? I'm telling you what happened. Nasha's expression remained neutral, neither angry nor sympathetic. What you choose to believe is your decision, but the truth doesn't change based on what's convenient. The words hit harder than any accusation. Jake wanted to order her off his property, to refuse everything she was saying, and go back to the simple certainty he'd woken up with that morning. Instead, he found himself remembering small things. His father's refusal to discuss certain topics, the way conversation would stop when Jake entered a room as a boy, an old wooden box his father kept locked in the cellar, contents unknown. The dreams Jake sometimes had, where his father spoke words he couldn't quite hear. Even if you're right, even if there is another marker buried out there. Jake forced the words out. What does it matter now? The land is legally mine. The past is done. Nasha's jaw tightened. The past is only done for people who didn't lose everything. For my people, for my family, the past is every day. It's in every promise broken, every piece of land taken, every agreement ignored. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Your father's signature on that document means something. It means he gave his word and then shattered it when keeping it became inconvenient. Jake felt anger rising, hot and defensive. But underneath it, something else stirred. Doubt. The uncomfortable recognition that he'd never actually asked hard questions about how his father acquired this land. He'd simply accepted the story told to him, believed what was easiest to believe. You rode all the way out here just to tell me my father was a liar. I rode out here because you deserve to know the truth. Nasha placed the stone marker on the porch railing between them. And because I'm giving you a choice your father never gave my grandfather. You can help me find that second marker. Or you can pretend this conversation never happened. Either way, I'm not leaving until I've searched every inch of that eastern ridge. The sun had started its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley. Jake looked at the stone marker, at the document still clutched in his hands, at the woman who stood taller than any person he'd ever met, and carried herself with a quiet certainty that felt unshakable. Somewhere behind him, inside the house, he could hear Robert stirring from his afternoon nap. His son, innocent, unaware that the ground beneath their lives might be shifting. If I let you search and you find nothing, you go leave bam. No more accusations, no more claims. Nasha nodded slowly. And if we find it? Jake swallowed hard, knowing he was about to step across a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Then I'll listen to whatever else you have to say. We should start now. We're losing daylight, and that ridge is rough terrain in the dark. They rode in silence toward the eastern ridge, Jake on his bay mare Copper, Nasha walking alongside with long, steady strides that matched the horse's pace. The stone marker rested in a pouch tied to her belt, and she kept one hand near it as they moved through the valley. Jake found himself stealing glances at her, trying to reconcile the physical presence of this woman with the story she'd brought to his doorstep. 6'4", shoulders broad as any man's, but moving with a grace that seemed to deny the basic physics of size. The ridge rose gradually from the valley floor. Rocky soil gave way to harder terrain dotted with juniper and scattered brush. The air smelled different here, drier, older somehow, like the land itself remembered things humans had forgotten. As they climbed higher, Nasha's pace never wavered. She scanned the ground with focused intensity, reading the landscape the way Jake read ledgers or brand marks on cattle. There, she pointed to a flat section of ground where the soil showed a different color than the surrounding areas. Darker, more compact. The kind of difference only someone who knew what to look for would notice. That's where we dig. Jake dismounted, pulling the shovel he'd strapped to his saddle. The ground was harder than he expected, packed down by 22 years of weather and time. He worked the blade into the earth, feeling resistance with each thrust. Sweat soaked through his shirt within minutes. Nasha knelt nearby, brushing away loose dirt with her hands and examining what lay beneath. Her fingers moved with practiced precision. This wasn't the first time she'd searched for buried things. After 20 minutes of digging, the shovel struck something solid with a dull thunk that sent vibrations up Jake's arms. The sound echoed across the ridge, startling a hawk from a nearby juniper. He cleared away more dirt carefully, revealing a flat stone surface marked with the same symbols he'd seen on the piece Nasha carried. His hands trembled as he worked, part exhaustion, part something else. The recognition that he was uncovering more than just a stone. Nasha reached down and worked the stone free. It came loose with a soft grinding sound. She turned it over slowly, deliberately, to reveal the jagged edge that matched perfectly with the broken marker from her pouch. Jake stood back, breathing hard from the exertion, watching, witnessing. She held the reunited pieces in her palms. Her expression remained controlled, but Jake saw her shoulders tighten, saw her breathing deepen, saw the way her hands shook just slightly as stone touched stone. We marked both ends of the settlement, east and west, to show the boundaries promised in the agreement. Her voice carried traces of something raw underneath the steady tone. My grandfather helped carve these. He told me about placing them in the ground, about believing they would stand as proof of the promises made. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead, his mind working through implications he still wanted to reject. Could be coincidence. Could be these were here before any agreement, part of something older. Look around you. Nasha gestured toward the ground they had been clearing. What do you see? Jake looked closer at the area surrounding the marker. Now that the surface dirt had been disturbed, he could make out patterns in the soil, dark patches, rectangular shapes, the ghost outlines of structures long gone. Watered among them, small fragments of pottery and woven materials so deteriorated they crumbled at the lightest touch. Shelter foundations. Nasha moved to one of the rectangular outlines, kneeling to trace its edges with her fingers. Adobe and wood frames, 12 of them arranged in a semicircle facing east. Standard Apache temporary settlement pattern. My grandfather described this exact layout. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't just story or accusation anymore. This was physical evidence, tangible proof that people had lived here, built here, invested hope in labor into ground they believed was theirs by legal right. He walked to another outline, then another, counting them out. 12 structures, just as Nasha had said, each one roughly the same size, positioned with clear intention and planning. Between them, he found more fragments, a rusted piece of metal that might have been a cooking implement, smooth stones arranged in a circular pattern that suggested a fire pit, pieces of glass worn smooth by time and weather. How long were they here? 6 months, long enough to plant crops that started to grow, long enough for children to feel safe playing in the open, long enough to forget about always looking over their shoulders. Nasha stood, brushing dirt from her hands. And then your father and his partners came with men carrying rifles and torches. The sun touched the horizon, painting the valley in shades of orange and deep red. Jake looked down at the boundary marker pieces still held together in Nasha's hands. Then back at the ghost settlement spread across the ridge. Everything his father had told him about this land, about how it came to be theirs, suddenly felt like a carefully constructed fiction designed to protect a son from ugly truths. There's more, isn't there? He heard defeat creeping into his own voice. More you haven't told me yet. Nasha nodded slowly. There's a name I need you to remember. Desba. She was my grandmother, and your father knew her very well. The name hung in the air between them like smoke. Jake repeated it silently. Desba, searching his memory for any mention, any story from his childhood that might connect to it. Nothing surfaced except the growing certainty that his father had kept more secrets than he'd ever imagined. A rider appeared on the horizon, moving fast. Tommy Reed, returning from his supply run to town. Even from a distance, Jake could see the tension in the way the older man sat his horse. Tommy rode hard up the ridge, reining in so abruptly his mount skidded on loose rock. Boss, we got trouble. He looked at Nasha, recognition flashing across his face. Then fear. You know who she is? She's told me some things. Jake kept his voice steady. What trouble? Tommy dismounted, his movements stiff, the movements of a man carrying weight that wasn't physical. Your father made me promise never to speak of it. 22 years I kept that promise. But you're digging now, you're asking questions, and I can't. His voice broke. Tommy was 48 years old. Jake had known him for 15 years. Never once had he seen the man close to tears. You can't what, Tommy? I can't let you hear it wrong. Can't let you piece it together from half-truths and old documents. If you're going to know, you should hear it from someone who was there. Who saw it happen? Who helped make it happen? Nasha's eyes locked on Tommy. No anger there, just recognition. You were one of the 12. It wasn't a question. Tommy nodded, unable to meet anyone's gaze. I was 23, needed money. Your father was hiring men for a job, $20 for one day's work. I didn't ask what the corn was. In those days, you didn't ask. The sun slipped below the horizon. Twilight came fast in the high desert, bringing shadows that seemed to rise from the ground itself. Jake felt the world tilting. The boundary markers, the settlement ruins, and now this. Tommy, loyal Tommy who'd worked for the family for over 2 decades, had been there, had participated. Tell me. Jake's voice came out harder than stone. Tell me everything, right now. Tommy sank to the ground, sitting heavily on a flat rock near one of the shelter foundations. His face looked years older in the fading light. August 11th, 1863. 12 of us met your father at dawn, 2 miles south of here. He gave us clear instructions. Burn the structures, destroy the crops, scatter the livestock, make the land unlivable, but no killing. He was specific about that. Said we weren't murderers. We were businessmen protecting an investment. Nasha stood perfectly still, listening, finally hearing confirmation of stories passed down through 2 generations of grief. There were 47 people in the settlement, 12 families, women, children, old ones. They woke to find us surrounding them. Some tried to run. We let them. Some tried to fight. We pushed them back. Most just stood there, watching everything they'd built turn to ash. Tommy's hands shook as he spoke. There was one woman, tall, taller than anyone I'd ever seen. She held up papers, shouting in English about agreements and promises. Your father rode up to her, took the papers from her hands, tore them in half right in front of her, told her they never existed, told her to take her people and disappear before someone got hurt. Nasha's voice came out barely above a whisper. Desba. That was her name. Tommy looked up at Nasha, really looked at her for the first time. You have her eyes and her height. I remember thinking she must be 7 feet tall, but probably wasn't. Just seemed that way. The way she stood, The way she looked at your father like he'd betrayed something sacred. Jake felt his legs weaken. He sat down on another rock, needing solid ground beneath him. My father did this. Your father ordered it. We carried it out. We're all guilty. But he was the one who planned it, who organized it, who paid us to destroy people's lives so he could claim water rights worth thousands of dollars. The last light faded from the sky. Stars began appearing, cold and distant and indifferent to the sins of men. There's one more thing you need to know. Tommy stood slowly, joints protesting. Your father had a chest, kept it locked in the cellar beneath the barn, made me promise to burn it when he died. I couldn't do it, couldn't quite bring myself to destroy evidence, so I left it there. If you want the full truth, that's where you'll find it. Jake looked at Nasha. She held the boundary markers, one piece in each hand, standing against the darkening sky like something carved from the same stone. Will you stay? Jake heard himself asking. While I look in the cellar, while I see what my father kept hidden? I've waited 22 years. Nasha's voice was quiet but steady. I can wait one more night. They rode back to the ranch in full darkness. 3 people bound together by secrets and stones and the weight of history that refused to stay buried. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, caring nothing for the small human dramas unfolding below. But Jake cared. For the first time in his life, he understood that the past wasn't past. It was here, now, demanding acknowledgement, demanding justice, demanding choice. The cellar entrance lay hidden beneath hay bales in the barn corner. Jake had walked past it 1,000 times, never thinking to disturb what his father had sealed away. Now, in the lamplight that carved shadows from darkness, he understood why some things stayed buried. Tommy helped move the hay, his movements mechanical. The guilt of 22 years showed in every gesture. Nasha stood at the barn entrance, silhouetted against the night sky, keeping watch. Robert slept peacefully in the house, dreaming whatever innocent dreams 3-year-olds dream, unaware that his world was about to shift. The wooden stairs descended into cool earth. Stone walls pressed close on either side, hand-laid in 1858 when Samuel first broke ground on this property. Before the Apache settlement, before the betrayal, when the land was truly empty and waiting. Jake's lantern revealed a space 10 feet by 12. The ceiling was low enough that Nasha would have to duck if she came down. Tools hung from wall hooks. Old saddles rested in corners. And there, against the far wall, sat the chest. Oak wood bound with iron straps, a rusted padlock securing whatever secrets Samuel Thornton had deemed too dangerous for daylight. He wore the key on a chain, Tommy said from the stairs above. His voice echoed strangely in the confined space. Buried with it, I expect. Jake examined the lock. Yale brand, heavy duty, built to last, built to keep sons from discovering what fathers had done. He picked up a hammer from the tool rack. 3 solid strikes and the lock broke, metal shrieking its surrender. The sound felt final, irreversible, like breaking something that could never be made whole again. The chest lid opened with a groan of stiff hinges. Inside, documents lay organized in careful layers. Samuel had been meticulous even in preserving his sins. Everything dated, everything labeled, everything preserved as if he knew someday the accounting would come due. The first layer contained legal papers, multiple versions of the same land deed, each dated differently. Draft 1 from March 1863 referenced purchase from territorial trust. Draft 2 from May mentioned settlement agreement transfer. The final version, backdated to March, claimed direct purchase. All bore the same clerk's signature. McAllister, a name Jake recognized from town records. Dead now 5 years. Convenient. Beneath the deeds lay contracts. One document dated August 8, 1863, titled simply, Security Contract. 12 names listed in 2 columns. $20 noted beside each. Tommy Reed was number 7. Services rendered. Property clearance and settlement removal. Signed by Samuel Thornton. Witnessed by Porter Hastings. Jake's hands trembled as he lifted out the next layer. Correspondence. Letters between his father and the other ranchers. Planning. Calculating. Dividing the spoils before the crime was even committed. One letter from Porter to Samuel dated July 1863. The spring system is larger than we dared hope. Water enough for 3,000 head across our combined properties. The Apache settlement is positioned directly over the primary access point. We must act quickly before they establish permanence that even corrupt judges might hesitate to overturn. I await your plan. Another from Samuel to Martin Webb. The federal agent who witnessed the original agreement has been transferred to Arizona territory. The territorial clerk owes me favors. The timing is perfect. We move in 2 weeks. But the bottom layer held something worse than contracts or letters. A journal, leather-bound, 120 pages of Samuel Thornton's tight, controlled script, a confession written in real time, updated regularly, preserved intentionally. Jake climbed out of the cellar, carrying the journal like it might burn his hands. Nasha and Tommy waited it in the barn proper, where ceiling height allowed them all to stand. "Read it," Nasha said, "not a request, a necessity." Jake opened it to the first entry, April 3rd, 1863. Met with Apache representative today. Woman named Desba. Speaks better English than half the whites in territory. Sharp mind, saw through my first offer. Had to adjust approach. Convinced territorial agent Morrison to draft formal settlement agreement. Desba insisted on witness signatures. I signed. Porter signed. Martin signed. We all knew it meant nothing if we found water, but we needed them settled long enough to survey. Indians have no legal standing to enforce. This is chess, and I'm already 3 moves ahead. Jake's voice cracked, reading the words aloud. His father's voice speaking through time. Cold, calculating, treating human lives as obstacles to be moved aside. He continued reading. May 15th, settlement built faster than expected. Desba organized labor efficiently. Each family has role. They've invested heavily. Tools, seeds, livestock. Makes me almost regret what's coming. Almost. But business is business. Eliza would understand. She always did. Eliza, Jake's mother, dead when Jake was 8. She'd known. Or Samuel believed she would have understood. The same thing, perhaps. July 20th. Survey crew struck gold. Not mineral, but water. Underground spring system, artesian pressure, 500 gallons daily minimum. Value estimation $12,000 added to property. With this, we can run 1,000 head easily. Porter's and Martin's properties benefit too. We agreed tonight. Apache must go. Desba will resist. She's principled. Admirable but inconvenient. Tommy turned away, unable to watch Jake's face as the truth emerged in his father's own words. August 3rd. Approached Desba with compromise offer. Move settlement 2 miles west. We provide materials. She refused. Quoted our agreement verbatim. Woman has photographic memory. Explained water discovery changes everything. She said, does your word change with convenience? Felt ashamed, briefly, then calculated profit margin. Nasha's jaw clenched, hearing her grandmother's words preserved in the journal of the man who betrayed her. August 8th. Hired 12 men from Silver City. Gave specific instructions. No killing. Burn structures. Destroy crops. Scatter livestock. Make it uninhabitable but not fatal. We're settlers, not murderers. There's a line, even for me. The distinction felt obscene to Jake, as if restraining from murder while destroying lives somehow constituted morality. August 12th. Done. Witnessed from Ridge. Took 4 hours. Families fled on foot, carrying children. Desba stood longest, holding agreement papers. I rode down, took them from her. Said they never existed. Her eyes. Not anger, but disappointment. Like I'd failed a test I didn't know I was taking. Worse than hatred. Burned papers in front of her. She said, your son will judge you for this. I said, my son will never know. She smiled sadly. Said, truth finds its way. Jake stopped reading. The barn spun slightly. He sat down on a hay bale, journal still open in his lap. Tommy's voice broke the silence. There's more. September entries. About you. Jake didn't want to know. Didn't want to read what his father thought while his wife carried the son who would someday sit in judgment. But Nasha was watching. Waiting. The truth demanded completion. September 2nd, 1863. Eliza pregnant with Jake. Due March. Boy or girl, they inherit empire. They'll grow up believing their father was honest pioneer. That's the story we tell. That's the story that matters. Reality is what we write it to be. The words cut deeper than any blade. Jake had been born into the lie, conceived while his father planned theft, delivered into prosperity purchased with other people's suffering. He skipped ahead, unable to read every entry, landing on October 1881, 1 month before Samuel's death. 20 years since the clearance, profitable years. Jake is good man, too good for this business. Soft-hearted like his mother, part of me wants to tell him truth before I die. Part of me wants to protect his innocence. I choose protection. He'll find this journal eventually, maybe. If he does, he'll have choice I never gave Desba. To do what's right, knowing that's all any father can give his son. Choice and consequence. The final entry, November 1881. Dying. Doctor says weeks, maybe days. Jake doesn't know yet. Pain is deserved. Desba was right. Truth finds its way. I see her eyes in my nightmares. Not accusing, just disappointed. Worse than hell could be. If there's judgment after death, I'm ready. But I leave Jake the hardest judgment, deciding whether to preserve empire or restore honor. God forgive me for giving him that burden. Jake closed the journal. The silence in the barn felt heavy enough to collapse the roof. Nasha finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Your father knew you'd have to face this, and he didn't have courage to fix it. So he left that burden to you. Not courage, Jake said. Cowardice. He couldn't live with guilt, so he gave it to me. Tommy cleared his throat. Jake, it wasn't just your father, Porter Hastings, Martin Webb, the Sutton brothers' father. All the major ranchers in this valley have similar stories. This entire region's prosperity was built on what happened that August. The implications settled like frost. Not just one family's crime, a community's, a coordinated theft that enriched dozens while impoverishing hundreds. I need to go to town, Jake said. I need to know if anyone else remembers, if there's anyone who'll tell the truth. Silverton sat 8 miles west, population 340. One main street lined with false front buildings trying to look more substantial than they were. General store, saloon, doctor's office, marshal's station, church. The infrastructure of civilization imposed on wilderness. Jake rode in alone at dawn, leaving Tommy to watch Robert and Nasha to examine the documents in detail. The streets were empty at this hour, shopkeepers sweeping porches, early risers heading to work or prayer, depending on their vices and virtues. He tied copper outside Sarah Mitchell's general store. Sarah was 52, widowed for 7 years, and known as the town's unofficial historian. She kept every newspaper clipping, every significant document, every piece of gossip that might someday matter. If anyone besides the guilty parties remembered 1863, it would be her. The bell above the door jangled as Jake entered. Sarah looked up from behind the counter where she'd been sorting receipts. Jake Thornton, haven't seen you in town for months. Sarah, I need information. About 1863. Her expression changed. The friendly shopkeeper mask slipped, revealing something more guarded underneath. What specifically about 1863? The Apache settlement, the removal. She set down her papers carefully, walked to the door and locked it, flipping the sign to closed. The action spoke volumes. Come to the back room. The space behind the store was cramped, filled with ledgers and boxes, and the accumulated detritus of 2 decades running Silverton's primary supplier. Sarah pulled out a box labeled in faded ink, 1863 Confidential. Your father made me promise never to show this to anyone, but he's dead, and you're asking. That changes things. The box contained newspaper clippings, headlines screaming about peaceful Apache relocation and progress for the territory, articles written with the certainty of truth but carrying the stench of propaganda. Beneath the clippings, letters. From Samuel to Sarah when she'd worked as the clerk's assistant, instructions on which documents to file, which to lose, which to alter. Precise directions for constructing a paper trail that would withstand casual scrutiny. How many people know? Jake asked. Everyone over 50 probably knows or suspects. The younger generation believes the newspaper version. That's how history works. The winners write it. The losers become footnotes. She pulled out a ledger showing business revenues for the years before and after 1863. The numbers told their own story. General store income jumped from $1,200 annually to $4,800. The saloon tripled its take. The doctor treated 3 times as many patients. Every business benefited from the sudden prosperity water brought to the valley. We all profited, Jake. My husband, myself, the doctor, everyone. That's why no one talks about it. Admission requires repayment. Who can afford to repay 20 years of prosperity? Sarah reached beneath the counter and withdrew a sealed envelope, yellow with age, Jake's name written across the front in his father's distinctive script. He left this, said to give you if anyone ever came asking about 1863, especially if it was an Apache woman. Jake's hands shook as he took the envelope. His father had anticipated everything, planned for every contingency, left instructions reaching beyond death. Sarah, there's going to be a hearing in 9 days about the property, about what happened. I need you to know I'm not hiding this. Her face paled. Jake, no attorney within 100 miles will take a case against established property rights. You'll stand alone. Then I'll stand alone. He left the store, envelope burning in his pocket, headed 2 buildings down to the marshal's office. Marshal James Garrett was 45, former Union cavalry, straight-backed and honest to a degree that made him unusual in territorial politics. He looked up from his desk as Jake entered, unsurprised. News traveled faster than horses in small towns. Heard you got an Apache visitor? Word spreads. Small town. What can I do for you, Jake? Jake laid out the situation. The settlement agreement, the forced removal, his father's journal. Garrett listened without interrupting, face unreadable as stone. When Jake finished, Garrett leaned back in his chair. Legally speaking, you're in a difficult position. Explain. Garrett pulled out a law book, flipping to marked pages with the ease of someone who'd consulted this section before. Statute of limitations on theft and fraud in New Mexico territory is 5 years. Property disputes have 7. The events you're describing happened 22 years ago, legally expired. So there's no recourse. Your deed was filed in August 1863, accepted by the Territorial Land Office. You've maintained possession for 22 years. That's called adverse possession, and it strengthens your claim. Courts favor established property rights. Disrupting ownership after 2 decades would set precedent nobody wants. But morally? Garrett closed the book. Morally, your father stole. Clear as sunlight, but law and morality don't always overlap. What would you do? I'd do what I suspect you're already planning, but I warn you it'll cost everything. Porter Hastings was in here yesterday filing counterclaims. He's trying to muddy the waters, make this so complicated it dies in bureaucracy. Jake felt the pieces shifting. Porter wasn't just defending his own property. He was trying to prevent Jake from acknowledging the truth because that acknowledgement implicated everyone. Marshal, if I wanted to transfer land voluntarily without a court order, could I do it? Garrett studied Jake for a long moment. You could file a deed transfer with the territorial office in Santa Fe. Make it public record. Can't be reversed without separate legal action. But Jake, the moment you file, you'll become an enemy to every rancher in this valley. I'm already an enemy. I just don't know it yet. Jake returned to the ranch at midday, found Nasha sitting with Robert on the porch, teaching his son basic Apache words. The scene struck him as both ordinary and profound. 2 cultures meeting in innocence, unaware of the blood between them. Tommy was inside preparing a simple meal, beans and cornbread, food that required little attention and less expense. After Robert went down for his nap, Jake gathered them in the study. The envelope from Sarah sat on the desk between them like something dangerous. My father left me a letter, anticipated all of this. He opened it carefully. The paper crackled with age. Samuel's handwriting filled 2 pages, front and back. Jake read aloud, his voice steady despite the emotion beneath. My son, if you're reading this, the past I tried to bury has found you. Good. You deserve to know what your inheritance cost. The letter detailed everything: Samuel's awareness of his own moral failure, his inability to rectify what he'd done, his hope that Jake would be stronger, braver, better. I was 30 when I forced the Apache families out. Your age now when you read this. I told myself it was necessity, that civilization required difficult choices, that providing for future generations justified any action. I was wrong. Jake's voice cracked on those last three words, his father admitting error and acknowledging sin, but only in a letter to be read after death, safe from the consequences of confession. Not wrong about necessity. Land is power, water is life. In men who hesitate, lose both. Wrong about method. Wrong to give my word and break it. Wrong to look Desba in the eye and lie. Nasha stood motionless, hearing her grandmother's name spoken by the man who destroyed her life. Desba haunts me, not supernatural, but in memory. She looked at me with such disappointment when I took the agreement papers. Not anger, disappointment, like she'd expected better and I'd failed. That look has been with me 18 years. The letter continued with technical details. The cost of the clearance, $240. The profit, over $15,000, and return on investment of more than 5,000%. Best business decision Samuel ever made. Worst moral decision. You're reading this, which means Apache family has returned with evidence. Probably Kuruk's family. He swore he'd preserve truth. Respect him for that. More than I deserve. Here's what you need to know. Legal standing, you'll win in court. 20+ years possession, filed deed, territorial backing. No judge will overturn established property rights for ancient Apache claim. Moral standing, you know what's right. Question is whether you're brave enough to do it. The admission hung in the air. Samuel knew exactly what he was asking his son to do, knew the cost, chose not to pay it himself. I wasn't brave enough. I chose wealth over honor, future prosperity over present integrity. I built you an empire on theft. That's my legacy, a fortune with rotten foundation. You have choice I never gave Desba. To make it right, knowing full cost. If you choose wealth, I understand. World is harsh, and protecting family is primal duty. You'll rationalize like I did. You'll sleep eventually. If you choose honor, you'll lose everything I built. Community will ostracize you. Other ranchers will see you as threat. You'll struggle financially, but you'll sleep immediately. Jake folded the letter carefully. The silence stretched long enough that Tommy shifted uncomfortably. He knew, Nasha finally said. Knew you'd have to choose. And he still left you this burden. Because he couldn't carry it himself, Jake replied. Because guilt is easier to pass down than to resolve. Tommy stood abruptly. I'll testify at whatever hearing happens. I'll tell everything I saw, everything I did. It'll ruin what's left of my reputation, but he trailed off, then continued Stryger. I'm 48 years old, lived longer with guilt than with honor. Time to change that. There won't be a hearing, Jake said. I'm going to Santa Fe tomorrow, filing a voluntary land transfer, 300 acres to Apache Tribal Trust. Make it public record before anyone can stop it. They'll try to stop you on the road, Tommy warned. Porter and the others. They'll see it as existential threat. Then we ride armed and ready. They didn't make it through the night unmolested. Jake woke at 3 a.m. to the smell of smoke. Jumped from bed, already moving toward the window before his eyes fully focused. Orange light flickered through the curtains. Too bright, too close. The barn. He ran outside barefoot, not bothering with boots. Tommy was already there, bucket in hand, running toward the well. Nasha emerged from the barn loft where she'd been sleeping, coughing from smoke inhalation. The fire had started in the hayloft. Accelerant used. Jake could smell kerosene even through the smoke. Someone had come in darkness, started this deliberately, and fled before discovery. Copper and the other 2 horses were trapped inside. Jake didn't think. Grabbed a saddle blanket, soaked it in the water trough, held it over his head and ran into the inferno. Heat slapped him like a physical thing. Smoke choked his lungs. He fumbled with stall latches, burning his hands on hot metal, getting the horses out through sheer desperate determination. Copper bolted past him, wild-eyed with terror. The other 2 followed. Jake stumbled out behind them and hands blistered. lungs screaming, but alive. They fought the fire for 2 hours, saved part of the structure but lost the majority. When dawn came, the barn was a smoking ruin. $800 worth of equipment and materials turned to ash. Marshal Garrett arrived with the sunrise, summoned by someone who had seen the flames from town. He examined the site with professional thoroughness. Arson, obvious. Kerosene can found 50 yards away. Who, Jake asked, though he already knew. Garrett met his eyes. Wouldn't speculate publicly, but men who stand to lose if truth comes out aren't above intimidation. Utter Chen came despite it being Sunday, despite the social pressure not to help the man causing trouble. He bandaged Jake's hands without comment, refusing payment. Tommy stood surveying the damage, calculating costs Jake couldn't afford. This is a warning. Next time might not be just property. Nasha had been silent through it all. Now she spoke quietly. I'll leave. This is my fault. No. Jake's voice was firm despite the pain in his hands. This is their fault. Their fear. I won't give in to intimidation. But the practical problems remained. The barn had held tools essential for ranch operation. Saddles, harnesses, feed for winter. All gone. Replacing it would cost nearly $1,000. Jake had $300 in savings. Tommy offered his own money, $200 saved over years of modest wages. Still short by $500. We'll figure it out, Jake said, though he had no idea how. The unexpected arrived 3 days later. Dr. Chen came first, bringing medical supplies and refusing payment. I came to America 1870. Was told lies about opportunity. Found prejudice instead. I understand being on receiving end of broken promises. Father O'Reilly followed, the Catholic priest bringing food and quiet support. Church's history isn't clean regarding native peoples. I cannot fix past, but I can support man trying to do right now. Then Mary Sutton, sister to Marcus and Cole, arrived with $100 in cash. My brothers are wrong. Father was wrong. This money is from selling mother's jewelry. Use it to rebuild. She would face family rejection for the gesture. Came anyway. 3 young ranchers, none older than 25, showed up offering labor. We're new to territory, not interested in protecting old lies. We'll help rebuild barn. No charge. Jake stood on his ruined porch, watching these people arrive, and felt something shift. The community was splitting. Not cleanly, not easily, but splitting nonetheless. Older generation, those who remembered 1863, wanted silence. Younger generation, those who didn't live it, wanted truth. The pattern was clear. Time was on the side of justice, even if justice came slow. But slow wouldn't help Jake now. He still had 9 days before the hearing. Still had to get to Santa Fe. Still had to file the transfer before Porter or the others found legal means to stop him. We leave tomorrow, he told Tommy and Nasha that evening. Dawn. 3 days hard riding to Santa Fe. We carry everything, documents, journal, letters, the boundary markers. Make it impossible for them to claim we fabricated evidence. They'll try to stop us, Tommy repeated. I know. That's why we're going armed and why we're leaving before anyone expects it. Nasha held the boundary markers, both pieces now reunited. These have waited 22 years. They can wait 3 more days. But she looked worried. For the first time since arriving, Jake saw uncertainty in her eyes. What if we fail? She asked quietly. What if we get there and they refuse to file? What if legal system protects what your father did? Then we'll have tried, Jake said. Sometimes that's all honor requires, the attempt. The willingness to sacrifice for what's right, even if the sacrifice changes nothing. Tommy nodded slowly. Your father never made that sacrifice. He chose easy path. You're choosing hard one. That alone means something. They prepared through the night. Jake organized all evidence into a waterproof oilskin pouch. The journal went in first, wrapped in cloth to protect pages worn fragile by time. Then the letters, the contracts, the settlement agreement, the boundary markers, physical proof that couldn't be dismissed as mere testimony or faded memory. Robert slept upstairs, unaware his father was preparing to dismantle everything Samuel Thornton had built. Sarah Mitchell had agreed to care for the boy while Jake was gone. She was one of the few in town who'd openly supported his decision. Your father was my friend, she'd said, But friendship doesn't require defending the indefensible. I'll watch Robert. You do what needs doing. Near midnight, Jake sat alone in his father's study. The portrait of Samuel hung above the desk. Stern face, hard eyes, the face of a man who'd made difficult choices and lived with them. Jake stared at that portrait for a long time. I'm taking it down tomorrow, he said aloud to the empty room, to the ghost of the man who'd shaped his life. Can't have you watching while I undo your work. Can't have you judging me for choosing different. The portrait didn't answer. Dead men never did. But in the silence, Jake felt something like peace beginning to take root. Not full peace, not yet, but the first tentative shoots of it. The kind that comes when a man stops running from truth and turns to face it head on. Outside, Nasha sat on the porch keeping watch. Tommy slept in the intact portion of the barn, rifle across his lap. Tomorrow they would ride. Tomorrow they would face whatever waited between here and Santa Fe. Tomorrow, Jake would choose once and for all whether to be the son his father raised or the man his conscience demanded. The stars wheeled overhead, uncaring and eternal. The land breathed in darkness, holding secrets in soil and stone. And somewhere in the ruins of the old Apache settlement, the wind moved through juniper and sage, carrying whispers of promises broken and promises that might finally be kept. Dawn would come, it always did, and with it, reckoning. Dawn hadn't broken when they left at 4:30, 3 riders under fading stars, Jake on Copper, the fire-scarred bay, Tommy Reed on his roan, 48 years old, 22 spent carrying guilt, Nasha on a borrowed horse, 6'4", carrying generations of hope. Jake's Winchester held 15 rounds, one chambered. Tommy's double-barreled shotgun, buckshot in both chambers. The oilskin pouch on Jake's saddle contained everything. Samuel's journal spanning 18 years of confession, boundary markers reunited after 2 decades, letters proving conspiracy, the settlement agreement signed and broken. Robert had cried on Sarah Mitchell's porch. Daddy come back? Always, son. That's a promise. But Jake knew men who challenged power sometimes disappeared on lonely roads between nowhere and somewhere. Silverton to Santa Fe, 85 miles of high desert, normally 2 days. They would do it in 36 hours, pushing horses to dangerous limits, getting documents filed before Porter Hastings could organize legal opposition. First light touched eastern peaks as they cleared town. Orange and gold across mountains that had watched this drama repeat across centuries. Land and theft, and the occasional fool trying to correct historical wrongs. The first 15 miles passed in tense watchfulness. Jake's hand never strayed from the Winchester, eyes scanning for movement, for sun reflecting off metal, for horses where they shouldn't be. At mile 15, where road crested a rise, 2 riders blocked their path. Benson and Ricketts, Porter's men, young, hard-faced, confident. Road's closed, Thornton. Turn back now. No legal authority to close public roads, Jake replied steadily. Don't care about legal. You're upsetting the natural order. Nasha moved her horse forward. Her height made both men's horses sidestep nervously. You would shoot an unarmed woman? Tommy's shotgun hammer clicked back. The sound echoed like a gavel. Last chance. Shotgun at this range doesn't leave much to bury. Both barrels loaded. That worth $20 a month? Worth dying to protect another man's crime? The standoff stretched. Death versus obedience. Pride versus survival. Benson looked at Ricketts. Silent communication passed. Then Benson moved aside, face burning. Porter will hear about this. Tell him truth can't stay buried forever. They rode on, but Jake knew this was just the opening. That was too easy, Tommy muttered. Porter's planning something bigger. By mile 32, terrain transformed. Rock formations rising, canyons cutting deep. Apache country for centuries. My grandfather Karuk was born near here, Nasha said quietly. You could ride 3 days seeing only your own people. Children everywhere. Now empty. They reached Rio Chama near noon. The bridge was deliberately destroyed. Main support beam cut 3/4 through with fresh sawdust. Would collapse under a loaded horse. Fresh cuts, Tommy confirmed, within 12 hours. They knew we'd come this way. The detour cost 3 precious hours, 5 miles north, searching for fordable crossing, water low from drought, then 5 miles back south. By the time they regained their route, sun had passed zenith. Shadows lengthened. They'd lost time they couldn't recover. Jake pushed the horses harder. Copper responded, but Jake felt her tiring. 9 hours riding since 4:30. Need didn't change what was necessary. Near mile 58, they camped. Small fire, beans, hardtack. Jake took first watch. Nasha joined him. Why are you really doing this? Jake considered. Part guilt. My comfort came at cost to people I never knew existed. Part honor. But mostly I don't want Robert growing up with the same lie I lived 35 years. I want him to know his father chose truth when it mattered, even when truth was expensive. So when he's my age making hard choices, he'll remember choosing right is possible. But you'll struggle. Robert will grow up poor. Money can't buy sleep. I haven't slept well since you arrived. Now I understand why Samuel had nightmares his entire life. Physical peace doesn't guarantee spiritual peace. Desba told Karuk, a man who steals land steals from himself. Your father proved her right. Tell me about her. Nasha spoke of Desba, 6'3", learned English but refused conversion, believed written agreements mattered. She taught me to read at 4, said, know the enemy's language better than they know it. She died in 1882 believing someone would listen. Told Karuk, wait for a Thornton with a conscience. That's what I came to find. Morning came cold. They rode at first light. Santa Fe appeared at mile 70. At mile 73, where road squeezed through narrow pass, 6 riders blocked the way. Cole Sutton leading, professional hired guns backing him. Turn around, Jake, you're not filing anything. Move aside, Cole. You're threatening every rancher's property title in the valley. Jake's hand moved toward his Winchester. Your family's property was obtained the same way, through theft and violence. I'm correcting my father's crime. What you do about yours is your business. Right? Cole spat. That's weakness. That's betrayal. You mean thieves? Liars? That's not my kind. Tommy raised his shotgun, both hammers back. Nasha moved forward. You would murder to protect a comfortable lie. Self-defense against people threatening our livelihoods. Then hoofbeats. Marshal Garrett with 2 deputies, all armed. Garrett positioned his horse ahead of Cole's. Stand down. This is attempted robbery of legal documents. Federal crime, interfering with citizens' right to petition territorial authorities. Also federal. You're looking at decades in prison. He paused. 30 seconds to move aside or face arrest. Cole calculated, 6 against 9, 3 with badges and federal authority. Fighting a marshal meant territorial involvement. Federal agents. Prison. This isn't over, Thornton. But Cole moved aside. They covered final 13 miles with escort. Santa Fe rose from desert. Adobe buildings. Government complex. The Territorial Land Office occupied a stone building. Inside, Howard Brewster presided. 45, bespectacled, bureaucratic. Jake laid everything on Brewster's desk. Journal, letters, settlement agreement. Boundary markers aligned perfectly. I need to file voluntary land transfer. 300 acres to Apache Tribal Trust. Brewster adjusted spectacles. Highly unusual, Mr. Thornton. May I ask why? Correction of historical theft. My father stole this land in 1863. I'm returning it. Brewster examined each item meticulously. Read Samuel's journal slowly. Studied boundary markers with magnifying glass. Cross-referenced agreements with territorial records. Found original filing from April 1863. Found Samuel Thornton's signature, matching exactly. 2 full hours passed. Jake stood entire time. Burned hands throbbed. Back ached. But he stood. Finally, Brewster looked up. This is unprecedented, voluntarily transferring 300 acres based on 22-year-old claims. Based on documented theft in my father's handwriting. I'm correcting it. You understand this devalues your property significantly? $9,000 in current valuation. I understand the morality. The land was stolen. I'm returning it. You're doing this voluntarily. No coercion? Jake looked at Nasha. Something passed between them. Completely voluntary. I'm acting on conscience. I'm doing this because it's right. Because I can't live with profiting from my father's crimes. Because I want to sleep at night without nightmares. Brewster looked at Nasha. You have proper tribal authority. Nasha produced her letter. Heavy paper, tribal seal in red wax, signed by 3 elders. This grants me full authority to negotiate land claims and accept restitution on behalf of families displaced in the 1863 clearance, properly signed by Mescalero Apache Tribal Council. Everything is in order. Brewster read carefully, verified signatures, finally nodded. Everything appears proper, but this will be contested. Porter Hastings, Martin Webb, Sutton family. They're claiming this threatens their own titles. Let them contest. Everything is provable beyond doubt. Brewster picked up his stamp, heavy metal, official seal. Once stamped, it's permanent. Can only be reversed by court order. This will follow you for life. People will call you traitor, call you fool. Are you certain? Jake thought about Robert, his father's nightmares. Desba dying, Nasha bringing truth. I'm certain. Do it. The stamp came down 3 times. Seal, date, registration number. Effective immediately, November 18th, 1885. This is now public record. Jake felt something release. Weight lifted, weight descended, free from guilt, burdened by consequence. But cleaner, honest. Nasha took her copies with trembling hands. First emotion breaking through. Kuruk, Desba, 22 years, it's done. Garrett joined them outside. Word will reach Silverton by tomorrow. Reaction will be severe. Might want to stay here. No. We go back. Face it head on. They reached Silverton 3 days later. The town had transformed. Sarah Mitchell stood outside her closed store. They came yesterday. Porter, Martin, everyone. Told me not to serve you. They're pulling their business. She squared shoulders. I refused. I'm with you, but it's going to be hard. The saloon posted, Jacob Thornton not welcome, by order of management and respectable clientele. Bank manager intercepted Jake, nervous, apologetic. Porter called your loan, $180 due in 30 days. Bank board voted. We can't extend new credit. Whose choice is it, really? Manager flushed. Porter controls 3 seats. Martin controls 2. I'm following orders. Following orders? That's what cowards say. Church that Sunday, half the congregation walked out when Jake entered. Those who stayed avoided eyes, except Mary Sutton, Dr. Chen, Sarah Mitchell with Robert. Father O'Reilly preached about courage, about righteousness costing more than people wanted to pay. Half the remaining congregation walked out during the sermon. On streets, former friends crossed to avoid Jake. Children threw rocks. Old ranchers spat. Robert walked beside his father. Daddy, why are people mean? Jake knelt. Because Daddy did something right that made them uncomfortable. Sometimes doing right makes people angry. That anger isn't about you. It's about them. Like when I told teacher Johnny cheated? Exactly. Was Johnny being mad enough reason not to tell truth? No, truth is still true even when people get mad. That's right, son. Remember that. Economic impact hit brutally. Cattle buyers refused Jake's stock. Equipment vendors demanded cash only. Prices 20% higher. Jake sold cattle to pay debts, down to 87 head from 197. Barely enough to sustain operations. Tommy stayed without wages. Don't need money. Need to prove I can do one thing right before I die. But unexpected support emerged. Dr. Chen treated Robert free. Young ranchers rebuilt the barn. Father O'Reilly brought food. Mary Sutton brought supplies despite her brothers disowning her. The community split. Older residents hostile. Younger more sympathetic. 3 months later, official letter arrived. Governor's signature. Jake read it. His sacrifice changed nothing systemically. Porter and the others kept their stolen land. His action was singular. Would not cascade. The letter stated clearly, this action, while personally commendable, does not establish legal precedent for other historical property disputes. The governor's office takes no position on whether similar restitution is warranted in other cases. Nasha found him with the letter. Feeling regret? Sometimes, when Robert asks why we can't afford things, when I realize I sacrificed everything and changed almost nothing. But I sleep, no nightmares. No, the price was high, but so was continuing the lie. Nasha nodded. Desba said, justice delayed is still justice. Justice incomplete is still better than none. You gave her that. It's not everything, but it's more than we expected. It's enough to build on. Spring of 1886 brought Apache families back to Eastern Ridge. 4 families initially. Led by Nasha, they came with tools and seeds and cautious hope. They began rebuilding 8 structures. Adobe and wood frames, they dug irrigation ditches using traditional methods, planted corn, beans, and squash in the Three Sisters arrangement, traditional Apache agriculture. Jake watched from distance at first, uncertain of welcome. Tommy said what Jake was thinking. They could use help. You've got lumber, tools, knowledge of this land. They're your neighbors now. So Jake rode up one morning, wagon loaded with materials. Some families accepted his help gratefully, saw him as ally. Others kept distance, wary, not ready to trust any Thornton. Elder Nashada approached after third day, 68, face weathered by decades of displacement. Thornton, you did what father should have done 22 years ago. Too late to fix past, but maybe not too late to start different future. One where we're neighbors who help each other. Kuruk would be proud, not of restitution. We can never recover what was lost, but proud you chose truth over comfort. They established arrangements. Water rights split 40% to Jake, 60% to Apache community. Trade agreements, shared fence maintenance. Not perfect, but functional. Robert played with Apache children, learned their language. The sight made Jake's chest tighten with emotion he couldn't name. 5 years passed, days dragging, years flying. Jake turned 40, Robert 8. Ranch remained small but achieved precarious stability. Annual income had dropped from $2,500 to barely $800 in Jake's reduced circumstances. They lived with aggressive simplicity, patched clothes, simple food, equipment that should have been replaced. Robert's shoes had holes. Jake's hat was held together with wire, but they slept without nightmares. Community attitude softened microscopically. Progress measured in millimeters. Some businesses began serving Jake again after original owners died, and younger generation took over with less investment in old grudges. Robert grew up different, understood poverty's mathematics, made friends across cultural lines, was teased viciously at school, called names, pushed around. But Robert possessed something those boys lacked, absolute moral certainty. Jake taught him lessons Samuel never taught. We're not rich, son. We'll never be rich. Your grandfather could have left you $15,000. Instead, I gave most away to people he'd stolen it from. Robert, 8 years old, shook his head. You did right, Daddy. Teacher said people who do wrong and stay rich are worse than people who do right and stay poor, because they chose money over morals. You chose morals. I'd rather have a daddy who does right than a daddy who's rich. Apache community grew, 15 families by 1890, successful subsistence farming. Children attended mission school, reading, writing, mathematics. Nasha married, had a child, visited occasionally. Role evolved from adversary to ally to something approaching friendship. Still regret it? Sometimes, when I'm exhausted, when Robert goes hungry. But Robert is learning what matters, and I sleep. That's worth more than I can explain. Tommy Reed died peacefully in sleep, June 1892. Heart condition, 55 years old. Funeral was small, not welcome at town cemetery, so they buried Tommy on Jake's property near Samuel's grave. Tommy Reed made a terrible mistake at 23. Participated in violence he shouldn't have. Spent 29 years living with guilt, but he spent his final 7 years trying desperately to make it right. He taught me it's never too late to choose honor over comfort, but sooner is better than later. Rest easy, old friend. You earned it. Cleaning Tommy's belongings, Jake found final letter. Jake, If you're reading this, I'm gone. Good, it was time. I want you to know that working for you these last 7 years was genuinely the best time of my entire life. Not because of pay. You barely paid me, but because I finally did something right after 30 years of doing wrong or doing nothing. Being part of fixing 1863, even a small part, gave me peace I never had, working for your father despite better wages. Money can't buy that kind of peace. Redemption can't be purchased with gold, only earned through genuine sacrifice. Tell Robert, an old man who made terrible choices once doesn't have to keep making them forever. People can actually change if they're brave enough. It costs everything, but the price is worth paying. And Jake, don't let bitterness take root in your heart. The town treated you hard, but holding grudges just make you like them. Be better. You already proved you can be. Keep proving it every day. Your friend Tommy. Jake read it aloud to Robert, now 9. What does it mean by our daddy? Means even people who do wrong things can become good people if they're brave enough to change. Means redemption is possible. Not easy, but possible. Like you changed from being like Grandpa? I'm trying, son. Still trying every day. Years continued. 1895, 1900, 1905, 1908. Jake's hair went gray early, hands gnarled, back protesting. But he kept going. Robert grew into young man, restless, intelligent, ambitious. At 26, announced he was leaving for mining camps around Albuquerque. I'll send money home, make real wages, help keep this place going. Maybe save enough to expand operations. Jake wanted to argue, wanted to keep his son close and safe, but he understood. Robert had grown up poor because of Jake's choice. Boy deserved chance to build something. Mining is extremely dangerous work. Men die underground every day. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise. I'll be careful. And I'll come home rich enough that we never have to worry again. Love you, Daddy. Love you too, son. More than anything. Robert left spring 1908, headed for silver operations. He sent letters weekly, long descriptions of work, sent money monthly, good money, $50 some months, more than Jake made from entire ranch. Made Jake think his son might actually succeed, might build prosperity Jake had sacrificed. The telegram came Tuesday in June 1911. Cave-in at Albuquerque number 3 mine. 15 men trapped underground. Rescue efforts ongoing. Jake waited 3 days, each day longer than year before it, each day hoping for different telegram. Second telegram came Friday morning. 12 men recovered alive, 3 confirmed dead. Robert Thornton among deceased, body recovered. Arrangements pending. Deepest sympathies. Jake read it 3 times. Words didn't change. His son was dead. 29 years old. Killed chasing fortune Jake's choice had cost him. Crushed by rock while trying to restore what his father had given away. He stood in his study, same room where he'd read his father's journal and made choice that led here. To this telegram. To this unbearable loss. Was it worth it? Had choosing principle over profit been worth this? Worth his son's life? Jake didn't know. Might never know. Question had no answer that provided comfort. He buried Robert next to Tommy and Samuel. 3 generations of Thornton men. Builder, redeemer. Victim of redemption's terrible cost. Symmetry felt cruel, like cosmic joke about price of righteousness that kept demanding payment. He lived on alone after that, too old at 61 to remarry, too tired to do more than maintain what remained, too grief-stricken to care about anything except basic survival. When Robert's widow arrived with young Daniel in 1912, Jake felt something like hope return. Boy was 3 years old, same age Robert had been when Nasha first came, same age Jake had been when Samuel committed original crime. History moving in spirals, coming back to similar places but at different elevations, repeating patterns with variations. Scene 8, Frame Return, 1913, October 1913. Jake sat on his porch at 63, watching Daniel play in yard where 3 generations of Thornton boys had played. Boy had found old map in attic, map marked with Apache symbols and boundary lines, map that started everything 28 years earlier. Grandpa Jake, what does this map mean? Why is our ranch so much smaller than what's drawn here? So Jake told complete story, not sanitized, not heroic, absolute truth. Every painful detail. Nasha's arrival carrying evidence, documents, journey to Ridge, his father's journal with meticulous confession, choice between empire and integrity, consequences both immediate and lasting, years of struggle, Tommy's redemption through faithful service, Robert's death chasing prosperity his father had sacrificed, all of it holding nothing back, because Daniel deserved truth. Daniel listened with serious intensity. When Jake finished, Boy asked question that mattered most. Do you regret it, Grandpa? Giving land back? Making us poor? Getting Robert killed? Jake thought carefully. 28 years since choice. 28 years of struggle and sacrifice of son lost. Every single day, Jake said with complete honesty. And never. Both at same time. I regret terrible kind, regret what it cost Robert, what it's costing you now, but I don't regret choice itself. Does that make any sense? No, Jake smiled. Someday it will. When you're older and facing your own hard choices. Regret and righteousness can exist together. Life is much more complicated than children's stories make it seem. You can regret cost of doing right while still knowing right was necessary. That's what being adult means. Living with complexity, with contradiction, with choices that don't have clean outcomes. Nasha arrived as sun began descent. She was 56 now. Walking with cane after fall previous winter that never quite healed, but still tall, still carrying quiet dignity Jake had first witnessed 28 years ago. Her grandson, 8 years old with her eyes and Karok's height already showing, ran to play with Daniel. Two boys became instant friends, unaware of history's crushing weight, unconcerned with crimes and redemptions that defined their grandfather's relationship. Just two boys playing in dust their ancestors had fought over. Nasha sat beside Jake slowly, joints protesting. Two old warriors watching their grandchildren play in golden light of late afternoon. Still telling that story when Daniel asked? Boy deserved truth. How do you end it? Happily ever after, like fairy tales promise? No, there's no such thing as happily ever after. Not in real life. I end it honestly. I made choice, paid enormous price, would make same choice again despite everything it cost. That's how it ends, with honesty, not satisfaction. Community on Ridge is thriving now. 35 families. We have real school, church, trading post, built something real and sustainable on land that was always ours. That's something meaningful. And my ranch? Barely surviving, Jake admitted without shame. 215 acres isn't enough for modern ranching methods. Market changed. Technology changed. I'm too old and too poor to adapt. I'll probably have to sell within few years. Die broke most likely. Leave Daniel nothing but debts and stories. You gave away land for honor. Lose rest to economics and time. End up with nothing material, but something intangible. Something that can't be taken or spent or lost. Legacy of integrity. That's worth something real. Is it? Worth my son's life? Worth Daniel's inheritance? Worth everything it cost? Only you can answer that. But I think yes, because alternative was living your father's lie, dying his death, leaving same poison for next generation. You broke that cycle. That matters more than you probably understand. They sat in comfortable silence watching sun paint Eastern Ridge in gold and amber and deep purple. Same ridge where boundary markers had been buried and unearthed, where promises were broken and partially restored, where two cultures learned to coexist if not fully trust. Daniel approached with boundary markers Jake had kept as family heirlooms, two pieces of stone proving both crime and attempted redemption. Grandpa, these prove great Grandpa Samuel's crime, but they also prove your redemption. Which story matters more? Jake smiled. Smart boy. His father would have been so proud. Both stories matter equally. Remember this, Daniel. You'll face choices in your life. Easy versus right. Rich versus honest. Comfortable versus true. Choose carefully, but choose consciously. Own your decisions and their consequences completely. What if I choose wrong? Then you do what I did, admit mistake, fix it if you can, pay whatever price correction demands. That's all honor is, willingness to correct course regardless of cost. My father couldn't do it. I barely managed. Maybe your generation will find it easier. That's my hope, that each generation gets slightly better at choosing right over easy. Nasha's grandson and Daniel ran past, laughing about something only 8-year-olds find funny. Their joy was pure, uncomplicated by history they didn't yet understand. Two boys from two cultures playing together as if it were most natural thing in world. Maybe that was real legacy, not land returned or prosperity lost, but possibility their grandchildren might grow up without carrying full weight of their grandfather's sins, might build something new on foundations of truth rather than comfortable lies. Sun touched horizon. Jake felt every one of his 63 years, felt pain in burned hands that never quite healed, felt ache in back from decades of hard labor, felt emptiness where Sun should have been standing. But he also felt something else, something that had eluded Samuel his entire life despite all his wealth and power and carefully constructed respectability. Peace, the kind that comes from sleeping without nightmares, from looking in mirrors without shame, from knowing that when judgment comes, whether from Gondor history or grandchildren asking hard questions, he could answer honestly without flinching. Daniel, Jake said as darkness began gathering, everything I told you is completely true. Your great-grandfather built empire on theft in violence, and I gave most of it back to people he stole it from. You'll inherit almost nothing. Poverty, most likely, but you'll inherit it all honestly, with clear conscience. That's all I can give you. Truth and choice and knowledge that sometimes most valuable thing a man can leave behind is example rather than wealth. Boy nodded solemnly, too young to fully understand every implication, old enough to sense this moment's significance, that his grandfather was passing down something important, something that couldn't be measured in dollars or acres, but mattered nonetheless. Nasha stood slowly, leaning on her cane. Years had been hard on her too, but she'd lived to see partial justice, incomplete justice, but justice nonetheless. That counted for something. Jake Thornton, you gave back what your father stole, not all of it. Could never be all of it, Chuan. Time and suffering can't be returned. Lives lost can't be restored. But enough to matter. Desba would probably say it's insufficient. She had high standards. Karuk would say it's more than most would dare attempt. I say it's enough to let dead finally rest and living build something better than what came before. Is it truly enough, though? Has to be. We don't get to rewrite past. Can only write different futures. You wrote different, against enormous pressure, despite terrible costs. That matters. It has to matter. Otherwise, what's point of any of this? She walked away into gathering darkness, her grandson running ahead through shadows. Jake watched until they disappeared into twilight that was neither day nor night, but something between. Daniel sat beside him on the porch, boundary markers held carefully in small hands. Physical proof of history, of crime documented and partially corrected, of sins inherited and imperfectly paid for. Grandpa, when I grow up, what will I choose, easy or hard, rich or honest? Jake looked at his grandson. This boy carrying Samuel's blood and Jake's legacy in Robert's absence. This child representing future that might finally, possibly, potentially escape past's crushing gravity. I don't know, son. Truly don't know. But I taught you truth about where you come from. Showed you what choosing right costs. That's all any grandfather can do. Give you truth and trust, you'll make it count for something. The rest is up to you. Your choices, your life, your redemption or damnation to earn or avoid. Will truth be enough to guide me? It'll have to be. Truth is all we have that can't be taken away. Everything else can be stolen. Land can be stolen. Money can be stolen. Even life can be taken. But truth endures, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's expensive, even when it costs everything. Stars emerged overhead in the darkening sky, cold and distant and beautiful in their indifference to human struggles, caring nothing for territorial disputes or moral choices, witnessing everything, remembering nothing. Universe kept its own counsel and offered no judgment on whether Jake's choices had been right or wrong, or some complicated mixture of both. Land breathed around them, holding memories in soil and stone, and empty spaces where people once lived. Somewhere on Eastern Ridge, lights began appearing in Apache homes built on returned land, families gathering for evening meals, children being called inside for supper and bedtime stories. Life continuing in ordinary, extraordinary way it always does, regardless of history's weight or redemption's cost. Jake Thornton sat on his porch, watching it all unfold. Poor in ways his father never imagined possible, despite all Samuel's planning and scheming. Rich in ways his father never achieved despite all his accumulated wealth. Exhausted from decades of hard labor. Scarred by fire and loss and unrelenting poverty. Alone except for one small boy carrying family name forward into uncertain future. The boundary markers rested on the porch between them. Two broken pieces finally reunited after 22 years of separation. Circle closed after nearly 3 decades. Promise kept after a generation of waiting. Not perfectly kept, not completely fulfilled, but honestly attempted with full knowledge of cost and full acceptance of consequence. And in the end, in the gathering darkness of an October evening in 1913, honest was all any man could hope to be. Honest with others, honest with himself, honest with history that would judge him long after he was dust. Honest with God, God existed and cared about such things. The rest was just details, just the accumulation of days and choices and consequences that made up a human life. Enough had to be enough, because nothing more was possible. Nothing more could be asked, nothing more could be given. Nothing more could. The boundary markers sat reunited. The truth had been told. The choice had been made and owned. Enough.